Catalina de Erauso was born in 1592 in the northern Spanish county of Basque in San Sebastian. She was born into a noble, rich family which looked something like this. Catalina was placed in a convent at the age of 4, where she lived until the age of 15. After being severely beaten by a nun, Catalina ran away from the convent. She took on the name of Francisco de Loyola and then set off for Panama as a cabin boy, leaving on a ship from Bilbao. As a soldier, she fought several battles under the name of Alonso Diaz Ramirez de Guzman. After being seriously wounded in a battle, Catalina confessed her secret, believing she was on her deathbed. However, she survived and continued on to Huamango, Chile, where she enlisted in the army, serving under several captains, including her brother, whom did not recognize her. In her memoir, Catalina wrote, "I remained with my brother as his aide, dining at his table for nearly 3 years without his ever realizing anything. I went with him sometimes to the house of a girlfriend he had there. Other times I went there without him. He found out about this and took it hard, telling me to keep away from there. He lay in wait for me and caught me at it again. When I came out, he attacked me with his belt and injured my hand." Catalina became a second lieutenant, fighting on the front lines. When her division's commanding officer was killed, she took on the position of captain. Tragedy struck when she accidentally killed her brother, Captain Miguel de Erauso. Catalina dropped out of the army and fled to Peru. She became dangerously ill again and was tended to by a rancher and her daughter. The daughter took a fancy to Catalina, but to no avail. Catalina wrote, "After having me there for 8 days, the good woman told me that I could stay there and be master of the house. I expressed much appreciation for the kindness she showed me in my waywardness and offered to serve her as best as I could. After a few more days, she gave me to understand that she would consider it a favor if I would marry the daughter that she had there with her. The daughter was ugly as a devil, very contrary to my taste, which was always the pretty faces. Catalina married her anyway, with the goal of getting a good dowry. She received the money before going through with the wedding ceremony and quickly fled. Catalina spent the next several years moving around the country, stealing, picking fights, and gambling, her reputation for mischief and crimes becoming well known. In Huamanga, after being arrested, she, at last, revealed her true identity to a bishop named Fray Agustin de Carvaja. She settled into a convent for the next 2 years, after an examination which concluded that she was still a virgin. She grew restless, however, and headed back to Cadiz, Spain. She was famous in Spain. Whilst traveling in Rome, Italy, Pope Urban VIII himself officially granted her the right to wear men's clothing. Catalina wrote her memoir between 1626 and 1630. As her journal ends in 1626, historians are unsure of the rest of her life's journeys. What they do know is that after passing on her estate to her sister in 1629, Catalina de Erauso returned and settled in Latin America as Antonio de Erauso. The Casta paintings were at their peak in the 18th century, playing an important role in colonial Latin America. The painting's goal was to classify races according to Hispanic beliefs and to provide a visual social construction of race. The Casta paintings aimed to provide a structure which placed everyone in a specific niche in the societal hierarchy of Latin America. The representation of a particular category of people was only possible if represented alongside the other categories. In other words, in order to understand what a Morisco or Morisca is, one would have to firstly understand what is meant by a mulatto or mulata, as Moriscos were the children of a Spanish parent with a mulatto parent. Thusly, the Casta paintings were painted and presented in series. The children born to Spanish parents, but in Latin America, were called criollos. Casta paintings sought to solidify the social statuses of the different races in Latin America, placing the white Spanish at the top. Today, the paintings raise the question of socially constructed hierarchies versus self-identification. The idea of attributing a specific social status to a specific race is preposterous. However, in the 17th century, it was race that dictated class. Studying the Casta paintings makes us wonder if class exists as a result of biologically induced differences in the capabilities of different races. That said, even in this day and age, social classification of different races exists, known as racial discrimination. It is still present, subtle but very much present. This section of H.G. Ward's text explicitly discusses, with an inherently British bias, the particularly Mexican casta system and general race relations and social motives. Ward compares the classification of castes before the Revolution, in which he identifies the three pure races and remarks that any combination of the three were subdivided by names expressing the relation borne by each generation. The language he writes in expresses doubt and possibly mockery of the system. In explaining race from a geographic perspective, Ward is able to indirectly add to the confusion of his audience. In effect, he is able to inject doubt into the merit of a manufactured classification of colored people under the premise of "who really knows?" An important aspect of this text and this time period as a whole is the idea that these groups, with the great mass of the population having some mixture of Indian blood, are completely unique to the colonized New World. Ward explains how the pure races have multiplied, in an extraordinary manner, by intermarriages, and now form a mixed breed admirably adapted to the tierra caliente, but not possessing in appearance the characteristics of the New World nor the Old. In other words, not entirely indigenous, European, nor African. He emphasizes that anyone in the middle, and certainly the lower classes, could scarcely exempt themselves from some Indian heritage. Ward remarks that the extensive establishment of racial distinctions was the policy of Spain to promote a constant rivalry between the different classes in her colonies, in an effort to prevent unity among an outcast group that would otherwise together form a social majority. He continues, stating that race became synonymous with status to the extent that the King of Spain used the term whiteness to be appointed as equivalent to decreeing nobility upon a distinguished individual by remarking, "Let him be considered white." Ward himself being white, it is interesting that he places most of his doubt in the Spanish style of governing and colonialism. Where would Catalina de Arauso fit in a casta painting? She would still be considered Spanish white, since she was born in Spain, and even fought against indigenous Latin Americans. But what about her multiple name changes, unladylike tendencies to commit crimes, her self-identification as a man, and even her sexuality? Would they allow her to be at the same level on the social hierarchy as the Spanish white male conquistador? We can see how the casta paintings were based on a racially discriminatory mentality, and reduced people's worth in society simply due to their race, something most colonists wanted. They failed to create an efficient society based on a diverse population, which would still be equal in rights and freedoms, and equal on the social ladder. Both topics, that is, Catalina's life journey and the short-lived organization of society by using the casta paintings, show another side of history, that of defying social norms, especially by minorities. And the story continues today. Racial minorities, as well as people who identify as LGBTQ, are still considered marginalized group in today's society.